Urgent. This is incredible. Our forces have broken through to the front line with renewed strength. The fiery trap is closing. The Russian army has made a sharp turn. Putin's new target is in the sights of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. What an unexpected comeback. The dictator slipped up. The enemy's aviation is headed for destruction. A decisive breakthrough by our forces, Ukrainian-made Shaheds. This is the weapon of victory. France is stepping in. Tons of weaponry. The Kremlin's engine has finally stalled. All this in our episode Hell Point. Right now, the Pokrovsk meat grinder is back in action. As usual, our forces gave the occupiers a taste of birch porridge, a crushing defeat. Near Dobropilya, the enemy pushed their luck too far. The Ukrainian armed forces have run out of patience. Columns of equipment were sent straight to Kobzon. Putin, in agony, is screaming at the top of his lungs and looking towards southern Ukraine. It's begun. Everything is being decided near Kherson. It's hell on earth, where a brutal massacre of the enemy is still taking place. Everything about the latest events right on the front line is in the following report.
Russia is returning to mechanized assaults. The mass use of armored vehicles has been recorded on several fronts at once, most notably in the Pokrovsk direction. The Ukrainian Armed Forces have paralyzed an entire enemy battalion by striking their command post. Meanwhile, the Russians are just as unsuccessfully trying to break through to their own forces near Dobropilya, suffering enormous losses in the process. Everything happening on the front today, watch it right now. Military analysts on both sides of the front report that Russia has decided to return to the tactic of mechanized breakthroughs. 3 such cases have already been recorded in the past week. And each time, the Russian column was destroyed and their infantry failed to secure a foothold. The latest attempt was no exception.
The Russians were detected and kept under surveillance, as reported on the channel, while strikes were simultaneously carried out on their equipment 20 kilometers from the front line. Visually, the columns didn't even reach the Ukrainian positions.
At the same time, the occupiers tried to take advantage of the weather conditions near Pokrovsk. Given the rain and fog, it is now more difficult for both sides to operate drones. And Russia decided to use this time to attempt a breakthrough with special equipment. Notably, the column was destroyed and the surviving infantry scattered around the outskirts. After that, our troops on the front line finished them off.
Just in the past 24 hours, they've been trying to break into Pokrovsk itself. They even tried to show that they had made some progress somewhere, but we neutralized them there, and now it's been a full 18 hours of clearing operations across all sectors. The attempt in the Myrorad direction was also unsuccessful, even though several units, so to speak, moved in there, trying to attack from different sides and already reporting that they had achieved some initial successes. So we can see that we are very effectively destroying all these directions.
Another column of armored vehicles tried to break through somewhat to the north of Pokrovsk towards Dobropilya. Russian units are still surrounded there, and in order not to lose these mini bridgeheads, they are still trying to send reinforcements to them. Russia made another push towards the village of Shakov. Spoiler, the vehicles never made it to the settlement.
Shakov is so important because a road runs through it, which in theory could be used to supply the Russian troops trapped in the Avdiivka pocket. But everything became focused on Vladimirovka, which turned into a kill zone for Russian armored groups. As a result, the enemy, that is Russia, concentrated large forces in a very limited area. That's why the defense forces fired at the Russians with everything they had: drones, artillery, and GMLRs.
At the same time, despite already having 3 failed attempts to break through with vehicles, analysts believe the Russians are unlikely to change this tactic. The main reason is the Russian command, which is directing the offensive in Donetsk region.
Let's recall that the Russian group is commanded by none other than the legendary Sukhorukov Akhmedov. If the general was recklessly burning through columns near Vuhledar a couple of years ago, as 2 majors wrote in a Z channel and no action was taken against him, then it is highly likely that he will just as thoughtlessly burn through columns in new offensive sectors as well. Write the 2 majors.
Near Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region, the situation has managed to stabilize somewhat. Sabotage groups are currently unable to infiltrate the city from the northwestern outskirts. But in southern Ukraine, the situation is, on the contrary, becoming more tense. The enemy has carried out a regrouping there and is amassing forces near Kherson, according to the command.
The undeniable fact is that they are indeed actively concentrating a significant number of their assault groups in the critical Oleshki area. This strategic maneuver is clearly in order to continue, well, more like their persistent search and strike operations, specifically near the Antonivsky Islands, a key location in the ongoing conflict. We do have such information. In addition to these considerations, the opposing enemy forces will undoubtedly endeavor to significantly improve the structural engineering and defensive fortification of their established positions, where they are currently deeply entrenched and firmly situated. That is to say, on the left bank, he is no longer truly thinking about actually taking the entire island zone, although he certainly hasn't completely given up on this particular idea and constantly sends small groups to diligently try to gain a secure foothold in these critical positions. But overall, he is trying more to hold his ground and prevent the Ukrainian defense forces from carrying out any more active and effective operations.
At the same time, the Ukrainian defense forces managed to strike not only at columns of equipment, but also at the enemy's manpower. So the day before, Z military correspondents confirmed the information from the Ukrainian Armed Forces, which the General Staff had released a few days earlier. Ukrainian aviation carried out a targeted strike on a concentration of enemy forces in the Zaporizhzhia direction and destroyed the headquarters of the occupiers who are advancing there.
Ukrainian aviation smashed concentrations of Russian troops at 3 locations at once and destroyed the headquarters of Russia's 108th Battalion. The latter fact has been confirmed by the chauvinists themselves.
Given the recent effectiveness of the defense forces, which includes the daily destruction of tanks, armored fighting vehicles and artillery, as well as the elimination of over 1,000 Russians in just the past day, even at the cost of such losses, it has not been possible to achieve any significant success on any section of the front since the beginning of autumn.
Today we are already in the autumn-winter phase of this same offensive, yet the Russians still have not achieved any operational or even tactical successes as of now. Even though the forces deployed, especially the infantry component on all these fronts, are just an insane number of troops, several times more than our assault units, our infantry. However, today we see the result.
A new mega target for Ukrainian drones and ballistic missiles. Russia is making a bold move, expanding the Engels 2 airbase. Unexpectedly for everyone, Putin gave a daring order and is scraping together bombers from all over Russia. A new aviation hub is being deployed on an emergency basis. The first footage is already online. Ukrainian intelligence already knows everything. The dictator's hand is hovering over the apocalypse button. Our forces are on standby. The beginning has been made. What is the enemy really planning, and will Ukraine's defense forces be able to act preemptively? More on that in just a moment.
Russia is trying to reanimate its strategic aviation.
In October, Russia will intensify work on expanding its main strategic aviation base. Avivector military observer.
New construction is being recorded at Engels 2 airbase. In the northern part, concrete is being poured, additional taxiways are being built, and 12 parking spaces are being marked out.
Engels 2 airbase is one of the main hubs of the occupier country's strategic aviation. It is from there that strategic bombers take off to launch cruise missiles at Ukrainian territory. In addition, a significant amount of missile aviation weaponry is stored on the grounds of this base.
These engineering works began back in the spring. The active phase of construction has been ongoing for the past few months. It is likely that this is where the strategic missile carriers Tu-95MS and Tu-160 will be stationed, as well as Su-34 frontline bombers and Su-35 multi-role fighters. And at first glance, this might seem like ordinary construction work, but for military experts, it's a worrying sign. The expansion of the airbase increases the operational capabilities of the enemy's aviation, reduces the time between sorties, raises the number of aircraft in combat readiness, and simplifies the logistics of ammunition delivery.
These construction works at the Engels 2 airfield are first and foremost a demonstration. Following the significant strike by Ukrainian drones on March 20th, 2023, extensive and rapid construction efforts immediately commenced. In other words, it is evident that the Russian Federation is actively attempting to demonstrate that this particular military facility holds a very high strategic priority and is of utmost importance. Moreover, it is protected by air defense systems. So this is more of a political signal for the domestic audience than for the external one, meaning Ukraine or the United States. In other words, it's an attempt to show that the Russian central government is in control of the situation.
At the same time, work is underway at another airfield, Diaghilevo, in the Ryazan region. The aggressor country is trying to restore the mobility of its aviation and the density of its deployments, reducing its dependence on individual runways. Additional parking spaces and taxiways make it possible to deploy aircraft more quickly, increase the number of sorties, and reduce the time equipment spends in vulnerable positions.
By carrying out such construction work at these military facilities, the Russian Federation is trying to demonstrate that it continues to view so-called missile terror as a priority element of military political pressure on the leadership of Ukraine. In other words, lacking the ability to achieve real success on the front lines, the main focus of the Russian occupying army is on strikes, including the use of strategic aviation against infrastructure facilities on the territory of Ukraine and residential cities.
But the expansion of bases is only part of the equation. Aviation requires crews, fuel, munitions, and secure supply lines. Losses among personnel, logistical problems, and international restrictions on components reduce the effectiveness of the new sites. Simply put, more parking spots do not mean more strikes in the near future.
Considering that the airfield is located about 600 kilometers from the line of contact, 600 kilometers from the so-called Russian-Ukrainian border, it is within the range of Ukrainian strike drones and accordingly Ukrainian strike capabilities, specifically referring to the Long Neptune. Therefore, if there is indeed recorded activity of Russian aviation specifically from this airfield, there will be mirror responses from the Ukrainian side in terms of striking legitimate military targets. And this military airfield is a legitimate military target both when American strike assets are used, in the event they are supplied, and accordingly when a wide range of Ukrainian-made strike assets are used.
And these airfields have become favorites of the Ukrainian side. In particular, in March, the armed forces of Ukraine carried out one of the largest scale attacks on Engels 2. An ammunition depot was hit, and about 96 air-launched cruise missiles intended for several rounds of attacks were destroyed. The destruction of fuel reserves also seriously weakened the enemy's capabilities. And while the enemy tries to expand its infrastructure, Ukrainian defense is being modernized. If there is even the slightest activity that threatens Ukrainian cities, our defenders will once again deliver precise and devastating strikes, depriving Russia of its last remaining aircraft.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Now that's a breakthrough. Ukraine and the USA have joined forces. A new weapon developed together will be a real game changer on the battlefield. A counterpart to the Shaheds is entering the fight, but it's many times more powerful, accurate and faster. And that's not all. The arsenal of weapons for the armed forces of Ukraine is growing literally by the hour. What are the allies preparing in their secret workshops, and will this development become the trump card that finally defeats the enemy? All about this in the following report.
The Ukrainian Shahed has reached a new level. Now the drone is equipped with advanced Western guidance and control systems, and production will be established both in the USA and in Europe. It will soon go into mass production in Ukraine, the United States of America, and Germany. This is being reported by the press. The American company Otelion, in cooperation with Ukraine, has successfully tested the long-range kamikaze drone Artemis ALM-20. The drone is equipped with an artificial intelligence system with self-guidance and can strike targets at distances of up to 1,600 kilometers. At the same time, the warhead will weigh 45 kilograms, which is more than enough to destroy most enemy military targets, equipment, and hardware our military adds.
The key thing here is that it's artificial intelligence. And actually, let's put it this way. The price is quite reasonable, to put it mildly. And if those technical and tactical specifications, such as speed and flight altitude, are met, and as I understand it, these factors have already been studied and tested, then of course things will become a bit easier for us.
It is also known that the main feature of Artemis is its navigation and targeting system based on the Skynaut N onboard computer from the American company Otelion. As noted, it is this system that allows the drone to target and strike even in the event of satellite navigation failures and ensures high accuracy in the final stage of flight.
The enemy's electronic warfare systems mainly use GPS signal jamming. In other words, roughly speaking, this is what helps achieve more precise targeting. If we are talking, for example, about control channels, then yes, They do have some systems that allow them, for instance, to limit the capabilities of piloted drone control channels. We are talking about a system that, for the most part, performs automatic flight, thanks to, for example, the onboard equipment it is equipped with. Therefore, what we are clearly stating here is that, thanks to such advanced and sophisticated capabilities, this highly capable system can effectively bypass the enemy's electronic warfare systems and precisely hit its intended target with minimal, indeed almost negligible error. This remarkable accuracy is, once again, primarily due to the highly efficient and precise visual guidance system that is meticulously installed directly on this particular unmanned aerial vehicle, or UAV.
At the same time, the developer company has already announced that the drone has undergone battlefield testing. This has already been recognized both by the Ukrainian side and by its manufacturing partners.
This drone was created together with an unnamed Ukrainian company whose identity is withheld for security reasons, and it has already undergone full-scale testing, which, according to the company's statement, included ground launch, navigation with and without GPS, long-range transit, and ground activation.
It is worth noting that the Artemis ALM-20 is equipped with a nose camera, additional antennas, and apparently an electric engine, which is quite an unusual solution, experts point out. This is done so that, even with smaller production scales, high results can be achieved through more precise target hits, since the camera at the final stage of the UAV's operation will allow it to strike almost without missing, including bypassing possible anti-drone structures.
First and foremost, these crucial weapon systems will be specifically intended for and meticulously used to effectively destroy those critical targets that directly affect the overall military power and strategic capabilities of the terrorist state, thereby significantly impacting its ability to conduct sustained combat operations within the sovereign territory of Ukraine.
At the same time, joint production with the United States is far from the only international collaboration of the Ukrainian defense industry. Most often, Western partners are willing to invest specifically in drones. Denmark became a pioneer in the field of joint defense production with Ukraine and was the first to invest initially in enterprises in Ukraine, and now has allocated over 67 million euros to establish Ukrainian defense enterprises on Danish territory. Finland was also one of the first to agree to joint production with Ukraine. Back in November 2024, the Finnish defense consortium Suma Defense established a drone manufacturing enterprise on Finnish territory in partnership with 4 Ukrainian companies. The United Kingdom has also placed an emphasis on drones. A few months ago, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced plans to launch joint production on British soil.
We are currently working out the details and decisions regarding joint weapons production with our partners. These are significant decisions with those who are providing the most assistance. Specific projects, tangible benefits for our defense. In the future, there will be both production facilities and localized manufacturing in Ukraine that will help protect our skies. I want to thank our partners for their interest in this kind of cooperation with Ukraine and with our industry.
At the same time, the EU has provided 1.5 billion euros for the defense plan and cooperation with Ukraine, according to Bloomberg. The main goal of the program is to optimize the procurement and production of weapons, including joint efforts with Ukraine. So it seems that soon the number of joint Ukrainian-Western developments in the arsenal of the armed forces of Ukraine will significantly increase.
France has shocked everyone. This time, its support is louder than ever before. New missiles, armored vehicles, air defense systems, and training for our soldiers. All of this is already on its way. Macron is betting on a Ukrainian victory, a powerful signal. What other surprises is Paris preparing for the front? And when will the enemy feel their power firsthand? We'll tell and show you in just a moment.
France is Ukraine's ally in the fight against the Russian invaders. The country manufactures drones and air defense systems for the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine. As Defense Minister Rustem Umerov emphasized, our country has combat experience while France has a powerful industry. Accordingly, this ensures a mutually beneficial partnership for both sides.
There is no open data yet because the known cooperation on Scalp missiles, for example, is joint production. Well, in the British version, that's Storm Shadow. And there are the Caesars, which France supplies. Is there interest in Ukraine? Of course there is, because Ukraine not only has specific technologies that make it possible to wage next-generation warfare, but also the tactics of their use, experience, and, for example, millions of artificial intelligence records that allow these technologies to be used effectively on the battlefield. Of course, the French are very interested in this, just like any other country that cooperates with Ukraine.
It was the French, together with the British, who came up with the idea to send peacekeepers to Ukraine in order to provide our country with security guarantees.
Foreign Minister Sikorsky put it very clearly. Well, what kind of security guarantees are you talking about? Security guarantees mean you have to clearly state whether you are ready to shoot at Russians. If you are ready to shoot at Russians, then you have to do it right now, because Russia has already attacked Ukraine.
To tell the truth, at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, France did not immediately support Ukraine.
In Bucha, they came then together with Scholz and Draghi essentially to persuade Ukraine to surrender on Russia's terms. But when Zelensky took them to Bucha and showed them what had happened there, they realized that there was nothing more they could do.
In the summer of 2025, the Ukrainian Minister of Defense announced the creation of a new international initiative for joint arms production on the territory of the countries participating in the Ukraine Defense Contact Group.
Let's see how it will be implemented, and let's look at the specifics. I think information about joint arms production will appear. In general, Ukraine is now actively scaling up production in European Union countries. First and foremost, we're talking about Denmark, with which we have developed fruitful relations regarding investments in Ukrainian defense.
The initiative involves establishing licensed production of Ukrainian weapons in partner countries to meet the urgent needs of Ukraine's defense forces. In 2024, the French and Ukrainian sides signed an agreement to launch ammunition production under license from CNDS France Nexta. Thus, France is not only transferring old weaponry for Ukraine's defense, but has also established cooperation between its manufacturers and the Ukrainian Armed Forces for fundamental defense collaboration and the exchange of wartime experience. Now, the fuel crisis in Russia is officially gaining momentum and is reaching even the most remote areas. The Kremlin is in a panic. This is a dead end. Putin is desperately trying to come up with a plan of action, but everything is falling apart. You have to see this with your own eyes. Don't miss it.
Putin's absolute anti-record. Cars in Russia are ceasing to be a means of transportation and are turning into a luxury item because it is becoming increasingly difficult for Russians to fuel their vehicles. Despite the fact that the Kremlin extracts an enormous amount of oil, the country is facing a shortage of gasoline and diesel fuel.
As funny as it may seem, in a country that used to be a gas station, a raw materials appendage of China, with a pipeline-based economy, it now can't even provide its own population and businesses with that very oil and petroleum products.
The main culprit behind the catastrophic fuel shortage beyond the curb has been the Ukrainian Armed Forces and their precision strikes on the occupiers' oil refining infrastructure. Thus, by the end of September, oil refineries across Russia were idling at least 38% of their primary oil processing capacity, or 338,000 tons per day. For the former gas station country, this is a colossal market collapse. Recently, the fuel shortage has been seriously felt even at the front. At ordinary Russian gas stations, you won't find 95-octane gasoline in most regions, even during the day with a search party.
In particular, at certain gas stations, they have started to temporarily limit the amount of fuel sold per customer. Somewhere up to 20 liters, somewhere up to 30 liters, that's the maximum allowed for sale. And at other stations in some regions of Russia, they have even temporarily stopped selling certain types of fuel altogether. That is, in some places there was no 92-octane gasoline available, in others there was no 95-octane, and so on. At the same time, at small independent private gas stations that are not part of the so-called vertically integrated oil companies, there was a sharp increase in fuel prices.
The latter only made the situation in the country worse. Along with the shortage at gas stations came sky-high prices. This summer, gasoline and diesel in Russia have increased in price by a solid 15 to 20%. And starting from autumn, the price tags at gas stations across the border have been changing almost daily, each time adding 1 or 2 rubles to the cost of fuel. But even such an increase is not enough to cover the expenses of Russian oil refineries, which are now constantly under attack from Ukrainian drones.
Ilya Novikov, the scale of the shortage is such that this is a desperate attempt by hitting the pockets of oilmen, of oil companies that are already struggling, whose profits are collapsing and many of which have become unprofitable, to somehow supply the domestic market.
Things are going better for Russian oil traders on foreign markets than they are domestically. Previously, the state compensated for the price difference through exports, but today almost no one in Europe is buying Russian oil. Therefore, there is no longer any reason to expect cheap gasoline within Russia itself.
There's a big problem with fuel. The crisis will only get worse. Accordingly, oil companies can't make money on foreign markets because of the artificially strong ruble and falling oil prices. Right now, Russian oil is trading there at $55 to $57 per barrel, taking into account all the discounts and markdowns compared to Brent. And that's it. So now the oil companies, with their sweaty hands, are asking the government for help in lowering taxes, the mineral extraction tax rate, export duties, and excise taxes. But the authorities can't do that. Their budget is falling apart. They've got a hole in the budget.
The Russian economy has nothing to patch this hole with. As a result, the Kremlin couldn't come up with anything better than to announce the start of fuel imports into the country and at the same time to halt all exports of gasoline and diesel from Russia.
So basically, they've decided to import gasoline. Here we have Putin, who claimed victory, saying that Russia would not be a gas station, not a gas station country. I think that's a victory. We really need to point out that now Russia will be buying gasoline. How can we not recall Churchill, who said that when the Soviet Union starts buying wheat, that's when it will come to an end, right? Well, in much the same way, when Putin's Russia starts buying gasoline, after a while, it too will come to an end, just like the Soviet Union once did.
The Ukrainian authorities have also actively taken up the task of helping Russia come to an end. Alongside drone strikes on oil refineries, Kyiv is hitting Putin's economy hard on the diplomatic front as well.
If Ukraine synchronizes its strategy to reduce Russia's resource base together with its allies, with Europe, with America, with Japan, and so on, sanctions will be imposed very quickly. And countries like South Korea and Singapore will simply be afraid to supply gasoline to Russia so as not to fall under sanctions.
In such a hopeless situation, the Kremlin is grasping at its last straw. Disregarding all environmental regulations, the government has practically legalized counterfeit fuel in the hope that at least it will supply the Russian gasoline market. However, analysts are sure that such a decision will, on the contrary, drive the final nail into the coffin of oil refining in the Russian Federation.
The authorities have decided to fight the gasoline shortage with methods that cause suffocation and damage car engines. Deputy Prime Minister Novak has proposed to bring back for 6 months a special gasoline additive that was banned back in 2016. They want to use it to increase gasoline production, but there's a catch. This additive negatively affects the environment, damages cars, and raises the level of nitrogen oxides in exhaust fumes, which settle in the air at a height of 60 centimeters above the ground. It is dangerous for people to inhale these fumes. Symptoms of poisoning include slowed reactions, suffocation, and a bluish tint to the hands and ears.
And such a surrogate fuel with toxic additives will instantly turn an engine into a pile of scrap metal. After just 6 months of driving on this kind of fuel, a car will become unusable, just like all Russian public transport. Then, without proper gasoline or diesel, the entire multi-million strong country will be forced to switch back to good old horse-drawn carts.
That's all from me for now. This was me, Darina Hutkolo. We'll have even more scorching news in our next episode. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon.